Today we will see how do we find quotients. Basically, quotient is just another word to say division. So the quotient is the result of a division. So if someone is asking you to find the quotient, well, start thinking about division because that's the result of it. Now the key idea here is that if you try to find the quotient first, we're going to see if you can simplify the expression using factoring. And if you cannot factor them out, then we're going to use long division or synthetic division here. So that's the overall idea. We're going to see if I can factor it out. If you cannot factor them out, then we got to use long division or synthetic division because you want the result of a division, so you better divide. Okay, so let's look at the first example here. Again, we got to see if I can factor it out. Fortunately, on the first example, it's already factored out. So what do you do once you have it in factor form? Well, you notice that everything has been on the numerator. You got two multiplications here. On the denominator, you have an expression here. So if on the numerator everything's multiplied and then you divide it, then you can cross those expressions which are equal to each other. So in this case, you can cross out x plus 2. So what does that leave you? That leaves you with x minus 1. And that's your answer. Because when you're multiplying and then you divide, then you can cancel out those expressions which are equal to each other. It's the same idea as what is 5x divided by 5. The numerator is being multiplied. So here you can cancel out those 5 and then you leave x. It's the same idea over here, but instead of using numbers and variables, we use actually expressions. But it's the same idea. Now, let's look at example 2 here. Example 2 is not in factor form. So again, I gotta see if I can factor it out. So do numerator first and then denominator. So let's look at the numerator, 5x minus 15. Can I factor something out? Well, I see that they have a number in common, which I can factor out. The greatest common factor between 5 and 15 is 5. That's the greatest number that they have in common. So if I factor out a 5, what do I have left? I have an x and minus 3. So that's good. We factor out the numerator. Now let's factor out the denominator. Notice that on the denominator, we have what is called a difference of square. So let's do a quick review. How do you factor out a difference of square? So we write the expression. How do you factor it out? Try to see if you can rewrite every expression or every term in terms of second exponents. So x to the second minus 9, I can rewrite as 3 to the second. Now that I have it in this form, then I can factor as x minus 3, x minus the number, and x plus 3, x minus the other number. So if you need more help in factoring difference of squares, look at my video. So I can factor out x squared minus 9 as x minus 3 and x plus 3. So let's do that. X minus 3, x plus 3. Everything is multiplied. Notice that you have the same expression here, x minus 3 and x minus 3. So they can cancel out. So now you have 5 divided by x plus 3. And this is your result. This is your quotient. Let's look at the next example. Now we see that we have a little more complicated example here. But still, look at it one at a time. Let's see. How can I factor out the numerator? Well, again, notice that the numerator, it's another difference of squares. X squared minus 4. You can rewrite as x to the second minus 2 to the second. Now that I have it in this form, then it's clear that your factor is x minus 2 and x plus 2 is a difference of squares. Look at my other videos if you need help how to factor this out. So now I know that the numerator I can factor it out as x minus 2, x minus 2, and x plus 2. So that's the numerator. That's fine. Now let's see. How can I factor out the denominator? Now to factor x squared minus x minus 2, I notice that it's a trinomial, 3 terms. I notice that the highest exponent is 2, so it's a second degree trinomial, and the leading coefficient is 1. So I can use the x method. So if you have 3 terms and the highest exponent is 2, and you have no number in front of the x squared, then we can use the x method like we have done before. So now, little refresh. How does the x method work? You're going to look at the numerator, the number on top, and that number is being decided by the multiplication of the first and the last. So 1 times negative 2, that's negative 2. And then on the bottom, we're going to put the number in the middle, which is negative 1. Now we're going to try and see if I can find two numbers that if I multiply them, gets me negative 2. And if I add them up, it gets me negative 1. Well, I see that 2 times 1 gets me 2, but I want negative 2. So either one of them had to be negative. I'm going to put the negative on the negative 2. Because this way, negative 2 times 1, it does give me negative 2. Negative 2 plus 1, it does give me negative 1. So that means that now that I found this number, these are my factors. So the denominator, I can factor out as x minus 2 and x plus 1, which is using the numbers that I found on the x method. Okay, now that I have to this one, they are multiplying. So, oops. So the x minus 2 can cancel out. So that means that your final answer is the following: x plus 2 and x plus 1. Now, let's look at the last example here, example 4. Can I factor them out? Well, let's try. Can I factor out the numerator? Again, 3 terms, second degree, highest exponent is 1, so I gotta use the x method. Well, you don't gotta use the x method, but I prefer the x method to factor it out. To factor out x squared minus 2x minus 3, I use the x method. So now, what's the number that goes on top? The multiplication of the first and the last. So 1 times negative 3, that's negative 3. Denominator, that's negative 2. So let's try to find out two numbers that if I multiply them, gives me negative 3. And if I add them up, gives me negative 2. Well, 3 times 1 gives me 3, but I want negative 3. So I'm going to put the negative here, because negative 3 times 1, it is negative 3. Negative 3 plus 1, it is negative 2. So I found my factors, so I can rewrite the numerator as x in the first number, which is negative 3, and x in the second number, which is plus 1. Good, so I factor out the numerator. That's fine. So now, can I factor out the denominator? That's already, you cannot do anything to it, so let me just rewrite it. Okay, so notice that now everything's been multiplied, so I can cross the x minus 3. So that means that my final answer is just x plus 1. Now, you see that basically it's just a game of factoring. You need to remember how to do factoring, which you can do in different ways, which is difference of squared, or you can use the x method. And then you simplify, and then things will cancel out. So here, for your entrance ticket, find the quotient of the following. You got two examples here. Try to find out what is the result after you divide them.